The words didn't just land, they detonated. They cut through the hum of cameras, the shuffle of papers, and the low murmur of the crowd. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Heads turned. Eyebrows shot up. Even the moderator's jaw visibly clenched. And in that heavy silence, the insult hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Karoline Leavitt leaned back in her chair, lips curled into a knowing smile, as if she had just scored a clever political punch. To her, it was just another line, another jab, another soundbite meant to rattle her opponent. But this wasn't just any jab. It was a racial dismissal delivered on national television, with millions watching. It wasn't just aimed at Kash Patel. It was aimed at everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, who had ever been reduced to their skin color or their ancestry. And you could feel it, the collective intake of breath from the audience. Some gasped, some muttered under their breath. Others sat frozen, unsure if they had really just heard what they thought they had. But they had. The cameras caught every syllable. The microphones carried it into living rooms across the country. For Kash Patel, sitting just feet away, the insult could have landed like a sucker punch. Leavitt wanted him flustered, cornered, stripped of composure. She wanted the moment to sting so badly that he couldn't recover. That was the trap. But he didn't flinch. He didn't blink. His eyes remained steady, his posture unshaken. In the silence that followed, you could almost hear his heartbeat, not in panic, but in clarity. The insult had been thrown, yes. But what mattered now was what came next. Because this was no ordinary debate night exchange. This was bigger. This was about America's story. Who gets to claim it? Who gets to define it? And who gets to defend it when it's challenged in the ugliest ways? And as the crowd leaned in, as millions of viewers at home gripped their seats, the question became inescapable. How would Kash Patel respond? But no one could have predicted the way he would. To understand the weight of that insult, you have to understand who delivered it. Karoline Leavitt wasn't some fringe voice muttering from the sidelines. She was a rising star in her party, polished, ambitious, and brimming with the kind of sharp-edged confidence that made her both admired and feared. At just 20-something, she had branded herself as the new face of unapologetic conservatism, quick with sound bites, skilled at social media sparring, and never shy about going for the jugular. Her supporters praised her as bold. Her critics called her reckless. And on that stage, in that moment, we saw both sides collide. Leavitt's rise had been meteoric. The daughter of New England grit, she'd carved out her reputation by saying what others wouldn't, by leaning into controversy as if it were her oxygen. Pundits described her as refreshing, a disruptor, a fearless firebrand. But behind those glowing headlines was a pattern, a trail of comments, insults, and dismissive jabs that had left a stain she refused to acknowledge. What she believed was courage often came across as cruelty, a kind of swagger that demanded attention, no matter the collateral damage. And that's what made this moment so pivotal. On one side sat Kash Patel, the son of immigrants, a man whose career had been built not on volume, but on quiet, deliberate service. On the other sat Leavitt, loud, ambitious, certain that brashness was strength. This wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a collision of values, live on camera, with the whole nation watching. The audience in the room felt it instantly. A murmur rippled through the crowd like a wave. One woman in the front row put her hand over her mouth. A man in the back shook his head in disbelief. Some supporters of Leavitt laughed nervously, unsure if they should clap or cringe. Even the moderator, usually a master of composure, shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between the two figures as if silently pleading for control to return. For viewers at home, the effect was even sharper. Phones buzzed. Screenshots circulated. Social feeds lit up. In living rooms across America, families exchanged stunned glances. Did she really just say that? In an era where political incivility had become the norm, this still felt like a line that had been crossed. Not just a political jab, but an attack on identity itself. And yet, the cameras lingered on Patel. His silence stretched on. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of calculation. His gaze stayed fixed, unbroken. His hands rested still on the table. It was the kind of composure that unsettled opponents even more than shouting back. Because silence, in that moment, became its own form of power. Leavitt smirked, convinced she had landed her blow. The moderator cleared his throat, ready to move the debate along, desperate to escape the discomfort radiating through the hall. But the audience wouldn't let go. They were waiting. America was waiting. Everyone wanted to know, would Patel take the bait? Would he lash out? Would he stumble? Instead, he sat, calm, deliberate, letting the insult echo until its ugliness fully revealed itself. And then, Karoline Leavitt's journey into the political spotlight was anything but accidental. From the start, she positioned herself as a disruptor, a voice that would never be tamed by the old guard of Washington. Young, sharp-tongued, and unyielding, she carried herself with the certainty of someone convinced she was born to shake up the system. To her supporters, she was fearless, unapologetic, the embodiment of a generation unafraid to tell it like it is. But beneath that veneer of courage was a pattern that revealed something darker, an arrogance that dismissed others, a habit of mocking rather than debating, a hunger for attention that cared little for the wounds it left behind. Leavitt first made headlines not by building bridges, but by burning them. She relished conflict, thrived on outrage, and understood that in the age of clicks and clips, a sharp insult was often worth more than a carefully argued policy. Time and again, she leaned on this strategy: provoke, shock, dominate the headlines, and ride the wave of controversy to greater fame. The formula worked, until it didn't. There had been earlier incidents, moments that hinted at the reckless streak now on full display. A tweet dismissing entire communities as soft. A podcast appearance where she brushed off systemic racism as whining. A debate in which she mocked an opponent's accent, brushing it off as humor when pressed. Each time, she doubled down, painting herself as the victim of political correctness rather than acknowledging harm. The more critics piled on, the more her base rallied to her defense, emboldening her further. To those watching her career unfold, it was a study in contrasts. On one hand, a young woman breaking barriers, climbing political ranks with tenacity. On the other, a figure who wielded cruelty like a weapon, mistaking cruelty for strength. What her admirers saw as boldness, her detractors saw as recklessness. And nowhere was that clearer than on the debate stage, the night she unleashed the words that would haunt her. What made her so dangerous, and in some ways so effective, was her ability to cloak arrogance in the language of authenticity. She claimed to be real, to say what everyone was thinking, as if bluntness excused disrespect. She turned insults into applause lines, transforming slights into symbols of bravery. And for a time, it seemed to work. Each provocation boosted her profile, earned her another headline, and cemented her reputation as a fighter. But that night, in that charged room, the very trait that had carried her this far, the willingness to cross every line, exposed her fatal flaw. Because go back to India wasn't just another jab. It wasn't clever, it wasn't policy, it wasn't even strategic. It was naked arrogance, an insult stripped of any disguise, and its ugliness was undeniable. For a split second, she believed she had done it again, landed the viral moment, silenced her opponent, stolen the spotlight. Her smirk told the story. She thought the cameras were on her. She thought history was bending her way. What she didn't see was the way the audience recoiled, the way silence became condemnation, the way millions at home were shaking their heads in disbelief.
And this is where irony dealt its cruelest hand. The very strategy she believed made her untouchable, the provocation, the brashness, the gleeful dismissal of dignity, was the very strategy that exposed her weakness. For when she attacked Kash Patel, she wasn't just attacking a man. She was challenging a life story of sacrifice, service, and resilience that would dwarf her arrogance. She believed she had humiliated him, but what she didn't know was that Patel's life story had prepared him for this exact moment. Kash Patel's story doesn't begin on a debate stage. It begins decades earlier, with a family who carried little more than hope when they first set foot in America. His parents had left India with nothing promised to them, nothing guaranteed except the chance to build a life through grit and sacrifice. They worked long hours in jobs that demanded more sweat than recognition, pouring everything they had into the idea that their children would inherit not just survival, but opportunity. Those early years shaped Patel in ways invisible to those who only saw him under studio lights. He knew the long nights of watching his parents count every dollar. He knew what it meant to be different. The kid with the unfamiliar name, the brown face in classrooms where whispers sometimes reminded him he didn't look American enough. But instead of hardening into bitterness, those moments carved a deeper resilience. Each insult, each raised eyebrow became fuel. Every slight was another reminder of what his family had sacrificed to be here. Patel carried that with him into his studies. While others saw obstacles, he saw doors waiting to be pushed open. His path led him to law school, and from there into the corridors of public service, where he carved a reputation not as a loud partisan warrior, but as something rarer, an advisor who brought sharp intellect, loyalty, and calm under pressure. In the chaos of Washington, where shouting matches and hot takes ruled, Patel's demeanor stood out. He was measured. He was steady. He was someone colleagues turned to when the storm raged too fiercely. Over the years, he wore many hats: federal prosecutor, legal counsel, senior advisor. Each role demanded a kind of quiet courage, the kind that never makes headlines but builds legacies. He worked cases that carried enormous weight. He stood at tables where decisions had consequences far beyond the walls they were made in. And through it all, he never forgot the foundation his parents laid: service, sacrifice, humility. What made Patel unique wasn't just his resume. It was the way he embodied the contradiction of being both insider and outsider. He knew the machinery of Washington as well as anyone, yet he never let himself forget what it meant to be the son of immigrants who had been told they didn't belong. That duality gave him not just knowledge, but perspective. It gave him the ability to see both the promise of America and the fractures that threatened it. That's why the insult on stage cut so deeply, not because it was new, but because it was old. It was the echo of playground taunts, the sting of casual dismissal, the tired chorus of "You're not one of us." Only now it was amplified by a microphone, broadcast across the nation. It was a reminder of every struggle his parents endured, every ounce of dignity they fought to maintain while working jobs no one else wanted. And it was precisely because of that history that Patel remained unshaken.
Because for him, this was never just about Kash Patel. This was about the millions of families who shared his story: the shopkeepers, the nurses, the taxi drivers, the engineers, who had heard the same phrase in different forms. It was about the second-generation kids who straddled two worlds, forever proving their Americanness despite being born on American soil. It was about those who believed in the promise of this country enough to sacrifice everything for it, only to be told they didn't belong. Patel's calm in the face of insult wasn't weakness. It was armor forged from decades of endurance. He didn't need to raise his voice to show strength. His very presence was the rebuttal, the immigrant son who had risen to the highest levels of government, the man who now sat across from a rising political star and refused to shrink. In that silence after Leavitt's words, Patel wasn't just weighing his response. He was carrying the weight of generations, of countless others who had endured the same dismissal without the platform to answer back. His story had prepared him for this exact moment, when his dignity would speak louder than her insult. And this wasn't just about defending himself. This was about defending every American who had ever been told they didn't belong. The debate hall was no longer just a room. It had become a crucible. The air was dense with tension, heavy enough that even the seasoned moderators struggled to keep their voices steady. Karoline Leavitt leaned forward, eyes narrowed, the faintest trace of triumph tugging at her lips. She had delivered her line, her insult, and now she waited for the payoff. She expected Patel to fumble, to lash out, to confirm the caricature she had painted of him. Every second he remained silent. Her smirk grew wider, convinced she had cornered him. But that silence didn't weaken him. It weakened her, because silence magnified the ugliness of her words, echoing them back into the ears of every viewer without distraction, without noise to soften their sting. It was as if Patel had held up a mirror, forcing America to stare directly at what had just been said. And the longer he stayed composed, the more uncomfortable the room became. The moderator cleared his throat, shuffling his notes, desperate to move forward, but he knew he couldn't. The cameras wouldn't allow it. The audience wouldn't allow it. They were locked on Patel, waiting, needing to hear his response. Leavitt tried to fill the void, throwing in a half-hearted quip about real Americans and standing firm, but her words rang hollow, swallowed by the tension she herself had created. The laughter she expected from her base never came. Instead, there were scattered groans, a few muttered protests from the crowd. The applause line she relied on had vanished. And there sat Patel, still, unblinking, hands folded lightly on the table as if he had all the time in the world. His silence wasn't a retreat, it was the calm before a storm. Every camera was trained on him. Every viewer leaned forward. On social media, live comments ticked by in real time. Is he going to answer? Why isn't he saying anything? This is unbearable. What's he waiting for? The suspense had become unbearable, the silence louder than any shouting match could have been. Leavitt's confidence began to crack, though she tried to mask it with another smile. She tapped her pen, shifted in her chair, adjusted her microphone. The audience could sense it, the shift in energy. What had started as her victory lap was slipping away, second by second, into Patel's hands. The moderators finally gestured toward him, opening the floor. And still he paused. It was deliberate. It was surgical. He wanted the weight of her insult to linger just long enough for everyone watching to feel its full measure. And in that silence, Patel transformed from debater to witness, from politician to symbol. The moment stretched, each tick of the clock adding pressure, until the hall itself seemed to hold its breath. And then, with a steady voice, he began. When Kash Patel finally leaned toward the microphone, the tension in the hall was unbearable. For nearly half a minute he had let silence work as his first weapon, and now, with a steady breath, he began to speak. His voice wasn't raised, it wasn't hurried, it was measured, calm, the kind of tone that demands attention because it refuses to beg for it. My family came to this country with nothing, he began. They came here legally, chasing nothing more than the promise that hard work and sacrifice could build a better future for their children. My father worked with his hands, my mother with her heart. They never asked for privilege, never demanded shortcuts. They gave everything they had to a country they believed in. And they raised me to believe in it too. The hall grew silent again, this time not out of shock, but out of respect. Patel's words carried the weight of lived truth, unvarnished and undeniable. He wasn't counterpunching. He was telling a story bigger than himself. So when I hear, "Go back to India," he continued, his eyes steady, I don't hear an insult. I hear a reminder. A reminder of the sacrifices my parents made. A reminder of the nights they went without so that I could pursue my education, my career, and my service to this country. If going back to India means honoring that sacrifice, then I'll carry it with pride every single day. But let me be very clear, I will never go back. Because I am American, through and through. The audience, which had been holding its breath, erupted, not instantly, but in waves, like a tide rolling in. First came the claps of scattered supporters, then the swelling applause that grew until it thundered through the hall. The moderator's gavel tapped in vain. Even those who disagreed with Patel's politics couldn't deny the power of his words, the dignity of his delivery. Leavitt's smirk evaporated. She tried to interject, fumbling with her papers, attempting to cut him off with a quip. But the timing was gone. The crowd wasn't with her anymore. She glanced down at her notes as if they held an escape route, but there was none. Patel pressed on, his cadence deliberate. This country is not built on insults. It's built on ideals, freedom, democracy, respect for one another. My family believed in those ideals so strongly that they left everything they knew behind to embrace them. And I have dedicated my career to serving those same ideals, whether in the courtroom or advising at the highest levels of government. That is the story of America. That is the story you can never erase with 3 careless words. His rebuttal wasn't just a defense, it was an inversion. He had taken her insult and transformed it into a badge of resilience, a weapon of dignity sharper than any insult she could hurl. Every sentence layered another truth, Another reminder that belonging in America isn't decided by the loudest voice in the room, but by the values one chooses to uphold. Patel's eyes moved across the hall, connecting with faces in the audience, and then to the cameras, speaking as much to the millions at home as to the woman across from him. For every child who's been told they don't belong, for every family that's been made to feel like they're outsiders in their own country, know this: your story is the American story. And no insult, no dismissal, no smirk will ever erase that. The applause returned, louder this time, a standing ovation in parts of the hall. The moderator's attempts to regain order collapsed under the roar. Patel sat back, composed, not triumphant but resolute, the picture of dignity. Leavitt's rebuttal fell flat before it began. She stumbled over her words, attempted to accuse him of playing identity politics, but the audience wasn't buying it. Every syllable she uttered seemed to shrink against the backdrop of Patel's clarity. Her strength, her willingness to provoke, had become her weakness, exposing her as petty and small while Patel towered in moral authority. The cameras caught it all: her shifting eyes, her forced smile, the twitch of frustration as her moment of dominance evaporated. She had walked into the debate believing she could control the narrative with a well-timed insult. Instead, Patel had seized it, rewritten it, and elevated it into something untouchable. And then came the emotional crescendo, the line that would replay across millions of screens in the hours to come. Patel leaned forward once more, his voice steady but now carrying the weight of finality. In this country, we don't tell people to go back. We tell them to move forward. My family moved forward. I moved forward. And I will keep moving forward, not just for me, but for every American who still believes in what this nation can be. The hall erupted once more, the sound deafening. Some stood, some wiped tears, others simply stared, stunned by the power of words that turned pain into pride, insult into inspiration. In that moment, the insult turned into a badge of resilience. Patel hadn't just defended himself. He had given voice to millions who had felt the sting of exclusion and turned it into a rallying cry. And when the clip hit social media, the story exploded. The moment Kash Patel's words left his lips, they belonged to more than just the debate hall. Within minutes, clips of his rebuttal flooded timelines, stitched and shared across Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. By the end of the night, the phrase, "Go back to India," was trending worldwide, not as a triumph for Karoline Leavitt, but as a symbol of the ugliness Patel had so powerfully dismantled. Alongside it, another tag surged into prominence: #PatelForAmerica. The viral machine moved with breathtaking speed. One clip showing Patel declaring, "If going back to India means honoring sacrifice, I'll carry it with pride. But I will never go back, because I am American, through and through," racked up 500,000 views in the first hour. By sunrise, it had crossed 10 million. Memes emerged almost instantly. Images of Patel standing tall, captioned with his final words, "We don't tell people to go back. We tell them to move forward." Hashtags became rallying cries, adopted by young immigrants, activists, even veterans who saw in Patel's words a reflection of their own service. The media, too, pounced. Cable news played the clip on loop, anchors dissecting every pause, every inflection. Commentators on both sides of the aisle were forced to acknowledge the power of the moment. Some praised Patel as a statesman in an era of shouting matches, while others grudgingly admitted Leavitt had overplayed her hand. A prominent late-night host opened his monologue with the line, "Turns out the mic didn't drop. It shattered." The audience roared, laughter folding into applause. Celebrities chimed in, amplifying Patel's message. An Oscar-winning actor tweeted, "Dignity under fire. This is what leadership looks like." A best-selling author called it the most American moment I've seen in years. Even a retired general, known for his reluctance to comment on politics, wrote, "This is why immigrants strengthen us, not divide us." Patel's response had transcended the debate. It had entered the cultural bloodstream. But not everyone was moved. Leavitt's supporters rushed to defend her, claiming the clip was taken out of context, insisting she was just being patriotic. Conservative commentators framed Patel's words as emotional manipulation, accusing him of weaponizing identity. Hashtags like #RealAmericans first popped up, an attempt to claw back the narrative. Yet their efforts only highlighted the divide, one side doubling down on exclusion, the other rallying around inclusion. For Patel, the moment marked something deeper than political points. His inbox flooded with messages from strangers, immigrant parents thanking him for standing tall, young Americans of color writing that they had watched the clip with tears in their eyes. One viral post came from a teenager in California who wrote, "I've been told to go back my whole life. Tonight, Kash Patel told me I belong." That post alone garnered 2 million likes. Meanwhile, Leavitt's campaign scrambled. What was meant to be her breakout moment had become a public relations nightmare. Instead of writing a viral soundbite, she was battling headlines describing her as callous, reckless, and out of touch. Her smirk, once intended as a symbol of victory, now looked damning when paired with Patel's unwavering calm. Political strategists whispered about self-inflicted wounds, wondering aloud if she had just sabotaged her own rise. Yet the story wasn't just about Patel or Leavitt anymore. It had become about something larger, America's struggle over who gets to claim ownership of its identity. Patel's words had tapped into a well of emotion that cut across demographics, reminding millions that belonging wasn't a gift bestowed by politicians, but a birthright rooted in contribution, sacrifice, and belief in the nation's ideals. The clip kept spreading, reshared with captions like, "This is why representation matters," and "This is the America I believe in." Students replayed it in classrooms. Activists projected it onto buildings. Even Sunday sermons in churches and temples quoted his line, "We don't tell people to go back. We tell them to move forward." By the week's end, Patel had unintentionally become a symbol, not just of resilience, but of the possibility that dignity could triumph over insult, that calm could defeat cruelty, that words spoken with conviction could ripple outward in ways no campaign strategist could script. But beyond politics, something even deeper was happening. When the noise of the debate faded and the viral frenzy reached its fever pitch, what lingered most was not Karoline Leavitt's insult. It was Kash Patel's reframing of what it means to be American. His words had not been about winning points or embarrassing an opponent. They had been about reclaiming dignity from the jaws of hate, about turning an attack into a lesson for an entire nation. Patel spoke softly, yet with conviction, when he later expanded on the moment. True Americanness is not in your surname, or your skin tone, or where your parents came from. It's in your service. It's in your sacrifice. It's in your commitment to building this country stronger than you found it. The line echoed far beyond the debate stage. It was replayed in news segments, posted on placards, and quoted in family conversations at dinner tables across the country. The beauty of his message was its universality. He didn't just speak for immigrants, or for those who had been told they didn't belong. He spoke for veterans who had worn the uniform, for teachers who had dedicated decades to classrooms, for nurses who had worked night shifts during pandemics. He spoke for every American who knew that belonging wasn't about where you came from. It was about what you gave. This contrast, dignity versus hate, service versus arrogance, became the defining frame of the debate. Leavitt had tried to wield exclusion as a weapon, believing it would corner Patel, silence him, expose him as an outsider. Instead, Patel turned it into a mirror, reflecting back to the nation a truth it could not ignore, that exclusion weakens us, but service unites us. That arrogance divides, but sacrifice heals. For millions watching, this was not just another political skirmish. It was a reminder of who we are, or at least who we aspire to be. The immigrant child who sees her parents work 2 jobs so she can study. The soldier who salutes the flag despite knowing his ancestors once weren't welcomed under it. The neighbor who shows up with food during a storm. Patel's words reminded the nation that these stories are not exceptions to the American identity. They are its very foundation. Social media reflected this emotional resonance. Videos of Patel's rebuttal were stitched with personal stories. A daughter recounting how her father arrived with nothing and built a business. a young Marine explaining how his immigrant roots and his service were inseparable, a teacher sharing that Patel's words made her students sit a little taller in class. These weren't political endorsements. They were affirmations of belonging. Even those who disagreed with Patel politically found themselves acknowledging the moment's power. A conservative commentator admitted on live television, "You don't have to agree with his policies to respect the way he handled that attack." That was statesmanship. It was one of those rare moments when dignity itself became bipartisan, when the performance of grace under fire disarmed cynicism, if only for a fleeting moment. And yet, the deeper impact wasn't measured in likes, views, or headlines. It was measured in the silent courage it gave to those who had felt invisible. For the child who had been told to go back, for the worker mocked for their accent, for the family that straddled two worlds, Patel's response was more than a rebuttal. It was validation. It was a hand extended, saying, "You belong. You always have." As the nation reflected, the lesson crystallized. Patriotism is not loud insults shouted across a stage. It is not fear of difference dressed up as loyalty. True patriotism is quieter, steadier. It is parents sacrificing so their children can dream. It is citizens working, serving, and building, even when no camera is watching. It is resilience in the face of insult, dignity in the face of hate. In the end, Patel's message transcended him. It became less about Kash Patel the individual, and more about the enduring promise of America, a country where identity is not dictated by gatekeepers, but defined by contribution. A country where the phrase "go back" is replaced by the conviction to move forward, together. And as millions replayed his words, goosebumps rising with every repetition, the feeling was unmistakable. This was not just a debate. This was a reminder of America's soul and the responsibility of every citizen to protect it. Karoline Leavitt thought she had landed a knockout punch. With one sneering phrase, "Go back to India," she imagined she had reduced Kash Patel to silence, cornered him under the hot lights of a national debate stage. But what she never expected was that the insult she hurled would backfire so spectacularly, transforming into the defining moment of Patel's career. Because instead of stumbling, Patel stood taller. Instead of anger, he chose dignity. And in that choice, he flipped the script. What was meant to humiliate him instead revealed the hollowness of her words. What was meant to exclude him reminded America of its truest values. This story was never just about two people on a stage. It was about us, all of us. It was about whether we define Americanness by hate and arrogance, or by service and sacrifice. It was about whether we listen to those who divide, or stand with those who unite. And in that moment, Patel reminded us what side of history we belong on. So here's the truth. Dignity always triumphs over hate. Resilience always defeats arrogance. And the voices that try to silence us only end up amplifying our strength. If you believe in that, if you believe America is at its best when every person belongs, then don't let this story stop here. Share it. Spread it. Make sure the words spoken on that stage ripple far beyond one debate night. And if you want to keep hearing stories where truth rises, where resilience wins, where dignity outshines division, then subscribe, join this community, and stand with us. Because this fight is bigger than one man, one insult, or one stage. It's about the soul of a nation. And together, we move forward.